And we.
Okay, we're recording, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so whatever we say, yep, be careful. And
So what I noticed is,
and can we hear the people on Zoom? What about Linnell? I know Linnell. Hello, Linnell.
Hi, Russ. I'm here. Haven't worked out the video, but I can hear you and see you guys. So
we can all hear you, Linnell.
Great.
It's a miracle.
Very good.
It's a miracle. And who else have we got there out there in Zoom land?
Me, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Where are you calling in from?
Shortland as well.
Shortland as well. You beauty. Shortland is well.
Is well or as well?
Is well.
As well.
And is there anyone else out there in Zoom land?
Yeah, you got Matt up in Tea Gardens, but I can't get video.
Right. All right. Well, nice to have you here. Nice to have you here. So I want to welcome you all to the Permaculture Hunter. What are we? What month is this? October meeting. And we're really, really lucky today because we've got Lachy. We've got Lachy. You all are probably familiar with Lachy. He's a celebrity around here. Can I have your autograph?
No. Please leave.
Eddie.
Can you tell us who Lachy is?
Can I tell us? Well, I'm going to let Lachy tell you who he is. And I actually have to leave for a little while because I've got to go pick up my lovely partner, and I'll be back soon. But I'm very pleased to introduce Lachlan Storrie of Tree Frog Permaculture.
Hello, everybody. Okay. Well, do we like mill about until 7:30? Is it already 7:30? How do we roll?
7:26. I should probably wait a little bit longer.
Okay. Wait, so that's 4 minutes. Should I do a dance?
Yeah, I think
we can start.
Yeah, you reckon? Okay. All right. Huh? No? Fight. Start now. Don't start now. 4 minutes. Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
I'm always bad at this. Do you want to do this? Are you well practiced? Come on. Yeah. I'm on board. I just haven't practiced.
So hello to all of those in the room and to all of you at home. My name's Scott. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of Indigenous people, unceded lands. We're here in Varroa Mite and Awabakal country, and I'd like to pay my respects to all Indigenous peoples and cultures and our elders here, present and emerging, and past too. So thank you.
Well done.
All right.
Someone else arriving?
Yeah, it could be someone else arriving. We could say hello to. We might do that. So we might just spend a bit of time together to give the people from home the chance for those who are coming at 7:30, so that they're not missing out on anything that Lachy's got to say. So we just have had an arrival, and I'm wondering who it is. The person who's just arrived into the room. Janet, hello. Where are you coming from?
Woi woi.
From Woi Woi.
Far away is Woi Woi.
Good to have you with us. There you go. It is worthwhile setting up a Zoom. We can have Janet from Woi Woi.
And someone else.
I wonder if these are some of our Permaculture Hunter Permaculture Central Coast members coming on, perhaps.
Great.
Because I did share the invite with them, and Meg McGowan said it too, who's their chair.
Linnell, you can see the screen of people coming in. Would you
I
be
can.
able to welcome
Sure.
them and ask them who they are and where they're coming from?
Sure. We've got Janet, who's come from Woy Woy. Thank you, Janet. And we've got hello, Kevin. Welcome to Permaculture Hunter. Where have you come from today?
Foresters Beach.
Foresters Beach. Are you part of Permaculture Central Coast?
Yes.
Yes. Welcome, Kevin. Lovely to have you on board. And
Thank
Karen.
you.
Hello. Oh, Karen's put in the messages. She's from Wakefield. I think her sound isn't working, but she's with us tonight. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Linnell. Okay,
Welcome.
so
Sound or no sound?
it is
I've had plenty of sound.
for Karen.
Everybody.
I think
I don't
I think we've
single
got sound. So I think it's 7:30 now. I will pass over to Lachlan from Tree Frog Permaculture. And you may like to start with introducing yourself and giving us a little background to who you are, Lachy,
Oh dear.
and
All
why
right.
we're lucky to have you.
All right, we'll try my best. Hello, everybody in the room and online. This is a bit of a new paradigm. As Scott so kindly said, I'm Lachie from Tree Frog Permaculture. Tree Frog Permaculture is a small business I've been running for 12 years now.
I think I met you about 12 years ago.
Yeah. It's hard to think about.
Can everybody on Zoom please go and mute?
So everyone on Zoom who's rocking in now, would you kindly mute yourselves in the nicest way possible, just so we don't have noise interference. Thank you so much. All right. I guess text in the thing if you're having troubles getting anything, and Linnell will report.
Yeah, Linnell will pick this up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll do my best to figure that out. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you for your hidden support. All right. Yeah, 12 years I've been running the business for. I consult, I design, I educate, as you're going to experience tonight, an attempt at. And yeah, I implement designs. And generally do. I do all the things. So I'm very, very busy all the time, it seems, and a little overwhelmed at this current moment. But yes, so I am very keen on nature and creating systems that are self-supporting and as low maintenance as possible. And that's permaculture, right? So it's about taking observations out of nature and using those in your own system designs, whether that's a food forest, whether that's setting up your garden for the largest diversity of pollinators possible to fill in the gaps of the European bee massacre we're about to experience, if you haven't already.
Mine are going next Tuesday. No.
Yeah, mine are very close, I think. I got a message. Yes. However, there are some silver linings. Yes. Yes. So I'll try and highlight those silver linings if possible tonight. And I have a penchant for native bees, but I have a penchant for most of nature. I'm a little obsessive about the native bees though, so apologies in advance if it gets a little intense. I'm sure it's only going to be fun for everybody. So European bees, they're very busy. They're busy all year round. And that is actually a pretty big benefit for a lot of our veggies because they don't stop. And they're very, very busy. And that's why bees are known and renowned for being the lead pollinators. However, there is a lot of nature out there, and there are a lot of different insects and animals that do pollinating services. So in lieu of the ongoing presence of European bees for the next 3 to 5 years, depending, trying to control Varroa Mite, we have some other options.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hello. Someone is multitasking, it sounds like. Only a little bit defensive.
Marilyn, if you could mute your screen, mute your Zoom, that would be great. We can hear your sound. Thanks, Marilyn.
Yeah. Okay.
You would like the sound turned up, would you?
No, I'm going to have to go. I can't
Well,
go.
I've turned it off now.
I assure you those crickets weren't because no one is interested, I hope. Yes, so what I'm going to do today, is that a feedback here? It is, okay.
I'm not hearing the sound.
Curious. So I keep a lot of native bees, and native bees in Australia are incredibly diverse, beyond diverse, the diverse that we know. So there's thousands of known species, but we are, like most of the insect kingdom, we have a lot of things that we haven't really discovered or investigated very well, including how they operate in our world, what services they provide in the ecosystem, and extended into our garden ecosystem. So it's worth keeping your eyes peeled in the garden, and a big part of being in the garden is not just getting it to produce for you, it's to enjoy it and have it help your mental health, which it does me in a massive way. And not just since COVID, it's been most of my life. So without a garden, I would be in a bit of a pickle, and wouldn't we all? So I'm going to start with stingless bees, which you can see on the first slide here. And so this is one of the few native bee species that are colony forming. So they call them social bees. And that's much like, is this aiming at me properly? All right. It's much like, you know, European bees, except European bees are sort of more of a monarchy in that the queen is deciding who the next queens are and how all that goes down. Whereas these stingless bees, these are Tetragonula carbonaria, they actually have like a good, well, their bio region is mostly clinging to the coastal band down this far, spreads out up into Queensland. If you live somewhere out like Singleton, you're probably going to have too cold a winter usually for these guys to be easy to keep and at least like a box like we can keep them on the coast. If they do stretch out that far, they're probably going to be in a very well insulated log hollow or something. And that's usually where they're living in nature, in the bush. So when you're sort of keeping these guys, you want to make sure that you don't have them pitched out in the middle of the sun in the middle of summer where they've got no western protection. They don't have, you know, they don't have too much strong wind, all of that sort of thing. I've got a lot of mine with western protection. So say on the eastern side of a shed or a building, a little rooflet to help them weather the harsher weather events that we are coming across. And boy, oh boy, they're going to be more frequent and more chaotic. So a little bit of extra reinforcement around bee safety, bee safety. I'm going to coin that now. Is a great idea. And that's a great idea for most things in the garden, honestly. So this is part of where you, we're going to have to pick up the slack from these European bees going with not just a range of native bees, but a whole range of other insects. And so there's a huge number of things, and I'll go through a lot of the native bee options to start with and how you can sort of encourage those in your system. But afterwards, I'll talk about sort of the diversity of other insects that we don't really think of doing a lot of the pollination, but they definitely pull their weight, as small as that weight may be. So let me flick across. So one of the fun things about the stingless bees, I feel like I like to move around, and you're going to follow me with the camera? Okay. I'm going to make it really hard for you, Scott. So the beauty of these guys, they do, you know, instead of being a monarchy, they're more of a socialist situation. And so it's actually the workers that select who the next queen is going to be. And that means you can actually, with a nicely established and very well charged colony, and that means like the box is usually weighing 7 kilos and over. That means they've got enough pollen and honey stores to sort of weather this kind of quite invasive behavior, but we keep them in a 2-part or 3-part box. The brood comb, which you'll see soon, is in the 2 main parts, and we can actually divide that in half, put those full sections of box on empty sections, and then they backfill and requeen the one that didn't get the original queen, because the workers get to do that, which makes it very, very easy for us, well, much easier for us to increase the number of boxes and hives we can have. And so this is very useful for certain flowers, specifically the smaller ones, because these bees are very small. They work very hard, but they only fly 500 odd meters. And things like avocados, macadamias, mangoes, they all have very small flowers, and these guys do a great job at pollinating those. European bees did okay, but they're a bit big and bumbling for that size of flower. So these, and a big part of like knowing, what you want pollinated, looking at the flower, the color of the flower, the size of the flower, when it's open, all of that will play a part in what things are going to be effectively pollinating those plants. So it's all worth thinking about and keeping an eye on and making those observations in your own garden. So these guys are gathering a lot of sort of resin from usually plant flowers. Eucalyptus is a big one. Tea trees are really good. But in any design that I do, and this is good across the board, not just for the native bees, having a backbone of native garden plantings is really handy because it's habitat, it's always going to be there. Whereas like your annual garden beds, because they're annuals, you're going to grow them for 6 months and you're going to change those over. And while that was providing flowers for a period of time, having said that, make sure you let all of your veggies go to flower if possible, not only just for the seeds that you're going to get after, so you can, keep your vegetable lines running, which is handy. That's a whole different workshop. Everything's interconnected in permaculture, and I'm going to talk really fast. So tell me to slow down if it's a bit much, guys. And because everything's connected, big spider web, that's also my brain. So I'm going to do a bit of this jumping around, but we will come back around to the point I was making. So yeah, making sure that you have diversity is key, and that's the thing. Diversity in all things. Plants will lead to diversity of animals and pollinators. And so the diversity of pollinators means if one of them isn't active, then another one is going to be more likely active. And the more diversity you've got, the more chances are you're hedging your bets. And you're going to have a much more resilient garden system and much better pollination in lieu of these very busy European bees. So this is just fun because I like to put a bit of cladding around these stingless bee boxes, as I said, for extra insulation. So, they slow down a lot during winter. Under like sort of your 18 to 21 degree mark, they get very, very slow, if not basically stop and just live on their stored material. But yes, I basically used some old hardwood for this one here. Now, do you have to switch between this for like the people on Zoom, or are they just like, this is where things get really complicated. Yeah, they can see it. Me? Oh, they can see it. They can see everything at once. Okay, I won't worry then. Yeah. So the one on the left here, this is like an old hardwood offcuts box that I made to fit around one of the actual colony boxes, because the colony boxes only have fairly thin walls, generally speaking. And so I was just mimicking basically what they would be in the bush, which is like a nice hollow with nice thick timber walls. And I thought I'd be fancy, and I cut a keyhole entry for this one as their external entry, their veranda, so to speak. And over probably 2 years, they decided that that was definitely not an easy thing to defend against oncoming insect problems. So they filled it in with resin. And so I thought, hey, I'll be nice and arty. And they had totally different ideas. That's fine. It looks cool anyway. But as you can see, they have limited their, their defendable entry to a very small hole, which is generally a great idea for them. You can see sort of in here, this is the hole that is their actual like entry and exit. Pretty much the only hole they've got. A couple of drainage or air holes under the bottom. But this is the one where they're making sure that nothing's coming in to steal all their hard-earned honey and pollen stores. And these guys are actually starting to build their own resin. And depending on where you are and what trees are around, you're going to have them gathering different material types. It's all going to be resin, but you'll sort of see the different layers of resin that they layer on there. And it's sort of like it's almost like tree rings, you can sort of see what's been flowering. I mean, if you went to this level of input, you could sort of take little samples and sort of track back what each of those things came from and sort of have like a map of what's been flowering at any given time or what sap's been available, that sort of thing. Very curious. Anyway, I ended up getting a bunch of these because Ku-ring-gai Council was actually, they were doing a program where they were dividing these bees up, propagating them, and then giving them to local council people for free. I think they've changed that in recent years so that it's like a raffle thing because it's really hard to, it takes a bit of turnover, and especially with the chaos of like weather that we've been getting, and knocks most things around. And of course, when you have like, I'd say a big tree flowering, say there's not many eucalypts around in suburbia these days for fairly good reason in some instances. That's what they're usually getting a lot of their stuff from. And if it rains during like the flowering period of any of these plants, it washes these flowers out and they actually can miss out on whole like chunks of what they would, whole chunks of resource that might have been tackling before. So this is a good reason why, you know, we need to have as many of those different plants flowering at different times as possible. Make sure you've got that diversity and that backbone of natives. And so I'll come back to that native stuff and how it affects, you know, the breeding space for some of these other pollinators in a minute. But I'll just go through some of the interesting little native bee species that I at least have found around Lambton where I am. But what you get will be determined by where you are and how close you are to bush, because that's sort of where they're coming from. It takes a lot longer to get them to come to like an inner suburban space where there's not a lot of bush reserve around. But you will get the occasional one blow across in the wind. And if you have housing, you have water and you have food, then that's enough for them to hang around and breed as long as you've got the breeding space. So we'll talk about sort of the insect hotel front and how you can sort of set up different substrates for these guys to breed in. And that can be really handy in lieu of, you know, a lot of the natural bushland that we would hopefully have these guys breeding in, generally speaking. And Newcastle, boy, we don't have much left. And they're about to build like a road through Jesmond Reserve, which is going to divide it up yet again. So things aren't exactly improving on that front, sadly. So let's go to the next one. So just to give you an idea inside the stingless bee box, because it's super cool, this is, yeah, it's crazy. So a spiral is something that's like a repeated pattern in nature. It's really cool. But that's the brood comb you're looking at there, and that's through the main section of their box. And so they actually sort of, they spiral that up and then they get to the top and then they spiral it back down again. And so they're recycling from the bottom and sort of it moves like this up and down over time. And so every bit of space around the brood comb is where they're storing their honey in honey pots and the pollen in pollen pots. And you can see those quite clearly there. They don't mix them together like a lot of these other bees, which I'll show you soon. But this is where, you know, you can actually, it's hard to harvest from these guys down this far because they don't have as long an active period, because I was saying, like, you know, it gets lower than sort of your 20-odd degree mark and they're getting pretty slack just because, yeah, they're, you know, it's hard for a tiny little insect to keep things rolling if you don't have enough warmth. But, you know, in Queensland, they find these guys setting up in electrical boxes, all sorts of stuff, because it's warm enough for them to have like easy 9-10 months of the year just like going. So I usually get a little bit of honey out of these when I'm doing a split, just so they're not drowning in their own broken honey pots. And that's about all I try to extract from them. But if you have a really good system and we have a great year, then maybe you can do a little more. But I would probably play it safe on that. And the real benefit with these guys is going to be some of that ongoing pollination work. All right, let's go to the next one. So, there's so many different native bees, and they're so very hard to see most of the time, but very cool. And this is what we call one of the masked bees. So there's a whole range in this particular subset, and most of them are black. They look a little bit like a wasp, but they've got like these golden or white markings, sometimes on the face, some on the thorax. And so this one was just hanging out on the side of a house, basically sunning itself until some of the next action happens. But we can fly through some of this. And so Next one, this is a different species, but they look very, very similar. They're all in the sort of Calides family. But this is actually down near the lake at Fishing Point, if you know that. It's actually surrounded by a lake, but it does have a fair bit of like vegetation still. And I noticed that there are a few different things hanging around, but I just wanted to sort of throw some stuff out and see what sort of took up. And so a lot of these bees, instead of being a colony forming bee where they all work together and they collect a lot of stuff and store it in one place, they're actually called like solitary bees, and they're more like you got a female and a male, and they hang out in sort of a family unit, and they look at making like lines of cells in an old borer hole, and that's what this is mimicking. Or in reeds, so there's reed bees that sort of use the pithy center out of like some reeds on the side of a dam, or so actually reed bees have been found nesting in lantana. Which is an interesting sort of, you get these big batches of lantana and old lantana sticks. If you've got lantana around, great reason to pull it out. Don't just burn it or throw it in the green bin. Cut it into sticks of somewhat this length, bundle them together. It'll take time to age them because they're not really interested in fresh, sticky sap, stinky. It's full of like essential oils, so it's a little bit like insecticidal to a point. It does. They use the oils in cosmetics for some reason. I don't want that on my skin, but hey, each to their own. Maybe it mixes with something else and makes like an amazing perfume. I'm not sure. However, this is me being a bit of a brat. And you can see here, they've got this waxy substance that they're like, they're sort of limiting the entry of the hole with. But all I've done for this is I've got a log, and I've just drilled holes of a range of sizes. So you're looking at between 4 and 9 mil incremental. And you're going to, between those different hole sizes, you're going to attract a whole range of different native bees, mostly in the, all in the solitary sort of end of things. So there's not going to be whole colonies trying to jam themselves into one hole, because how could they? And I have not seen this material used up here. I have I believe different species of masked bee up here. And so this just tells you, like, you know, there's a whole lot of diversity out there, and depending on where you are, set the stuff up for them and be patient, and they will come. And so this guy was actually, or probably a lady, was sitting in the hole, and I just used a little stick to try and get it out for a photo. Hey, it was fine, all right? Don't judge me. And so I just went, gave it a little tickle, like near the entry, and it actually sort of came out and grabbed the stick, and then went back in, right? Tickle again, and it grabbed it, and then it grabbed it really hard. I sort of dragged it out a little bit. It's like, hey. And that's how I managed to get this photo. So, you know, I'm not harming it. It's just, this is now people know about it, and they can make more houses for them, and it's cousins and family. So handy and a little bit of fun, but yeah, go on. And this is actually a new one that I found in my garden last week, of all things. And this is mustard flowers. Yes, so yeah. And so, you know, a lot of these bees, they're naturally eating from native flowers, and that's probably what's going to mainly attract them in the first place. But so always having that, you know, that native section of your yard, really handy. Natives on the verge, you know, you don't really want to be growing food on the verge if you live in a suburban place where there's probably like a lot of road exits that have built up over many years. So putting some of those things that you're not going to consume directly from is quite a useful thing to do for those. And I am seeing more and more verge gardens going out there. I think Newcastle Council is starting to wake up a little bit. Yeah, it's about time, right? They do have an official policy. Whoo! All right, yeah. It's taken a very long time. I've had it's going to be on video. Anyway, I have had I may have been a little naughty in the past. So I have had people from the council tell me, look, you are better off asking for forgiveness than permission, because it is a bureaucracy. And that's the thing. They don't want to be culpable for any possible damage that occurs to infrastructure in any way, blah, blah, blah. However, if you're sensible about what you're planting, and, you know, okay, don't plant a eucalypt on the verge. That makes a lot of sense. You can plant a dwarf one. You know, if you, depending on where you are, you could have like 3 meter wide verge. You know, that's, you've got to use that. You know, I'd be on your case if you don't. Mine is only this wide. However, it is all natives, except for like there's a couple of little herbs there for the populace. I'm not sure if they're engaging in them. I think they're a little freaked out. They don't know the difference between rosemary and tea tree at this point, but they'll learn. And so this I actually saw going for, and in the same family as the previous one, living in those borehole simulations, but this is going towards old grape offcuts, and it's burrowing out old grape. And so things like grape, things like Tibouchina is a common one, if you know that one, purple flower, sort of, it's not a native, but it's got pithy center. Look, you like trial a bunch of stuff, I say, because like these guys are pretty adaptable. Like I said, like the reed bees are using lantana, and that was not here originally, nowhere near. It's a Mexican thing. So, yep. And again, where you've got them coming in, you've got a water source that they can access. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And make sure you've got a diversity of foods and the substrate for them to be breeding in. And then you're going to be able to build up your population. And I'll talk about how successful I've been at that soon. Go to the next one. And so these are reed bees, and they're likely the ones that nest in the lantana. This is actually not near my place. This is up near Dungog, but it goes to show you, you know, the diversity of flowers you're looking at to attract different bee types as well. So if you look at, there's sort of long-tongued bees, if you had to divide them via tongue length. It's a strange way to divide any animal, honestly, but so short-tongued and long-tongued bees. Long-tongued bees being European bees, blue-banded bees, teddy bear bees, there's a few others. Most of them are actually short-tongued, and so the short-tongued ones, like your stingless bees, reed bees. In fact, these guys have a medium tongue, I'm going to say, but they really like the more open flowers. So this is a paper daisy, and you can definitely grow those around. And they're great for your eyes, but they're also great for the native bees and a range of other insects. But you can sort of see here how they're just going around. One flower actually has a ton of flowers all in the one unit. And that's the same with most of these daisy type open flower sort of things. Like you can go for, you know, diversity is key again. So as many different colors of that type as possible, different flowering times. The more diversity, the more resilience you're going to have. And the more likelihood is you're going to see what different things you're attracting and reinforce that pollination output in your garden. And this is sort of where your ponds come in. Yeah, so this one was out at the Wallace Creek Water Gardens, but it just goes to show you like every garden, I think, should have a pond. And if you don't have much space, have a pond tub. But in the event of a pond tub, you need to be a little like clever about how you order things, right? So, because you've got steep walls, you've got like, let's start with pond depth. So if you don't have, okay, the council in all of its infinite wisdom says, oh, no, you cannot have a pond over 30 centimeters depth. And I think, well, okay, I mean, a toddler will drown in a cup of water if you let them. Like, this is, you just put a mesh cage over the top, make sure it's sort of decent size. It's not enough for a toddler's head to get in, you know, that's the exclusion point. But the thing about the depth being, if you have too shallow a water body, and in summer when it gets hot, you don't have enough thermal mass in that water for it to not be a unpleasant temperature for anything living in there. And there are an enormous amount of beneficial insects and pollinating insects that have a larval stage in the water. But also there's a lot of different flowering plants, and a lot of them are edible, but they're aquatic, and aquatic from like ephemeral down to floating from the bottom, surface floating, and sort of somewhat inundated but emergent. And so this is actually a fringed lily, and having, again, that diversity. I mean, there's so many beautiful natives, flowers, and then what comes to them. So you're getting double whammy there. Yeah, so that's, I think, a common spring bee. And I don't think we actually know where they nest. So there's a lot of information we are missing. We know they exist, and we know roughly what they're feeding on. But as far as nesting goes, we're like, I don't know. because we don't have like a lot of people putting that research in. There's only like a limited amount of research and funding going into this sort of stuff. So click on now. And that's why like within like your insect hotel, you know, having the widest array of different hole sizes, different pithy scented sticks, just trialing a bunch of stuff, cob blocks. So I'll get to the cob blocks thing, which is like your ground nesting bees. And so there's a bunch of them that will actually burrow into what would have been exposed clay banks of a creek, but a lot of, you know, what we've got around here is what we call a stormwater drain, which was a creek. We've just lined it with cement, and because we don't want fresh water hanging around, do we? We want that back into the salty ocean as quickly as possible, because that makes the most sense. And then we'll just build a desalination plant when we get really dry. So that is a leaf cutter bee. And so
Is that the leaf cutter?
that is a leaf cutter. There's a range of them. And I think this is one of the native species. And so it's not actually on this leaf to cut it. This is just a happy snap where I managed to get it to sit and rest for a hot second. Insect photography can be very challenging. They don't stop for long. It's great fun, you know. We shoot each other insect photos a bit. So these guys, and so I have a lot of clients that are like, oh, my roses. Something's attacking my rose leaves. This is dreadful. yeah. And you'll find that like if the periphery of your rose leaf is actually being cut quite neatly, what they're doing, and I've got a little video of this, but I couldn't dredge it up, but they land on the edge of the leaf and they just go snip, 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 and then they sort of take off with it, and you see this flash of green, and then they roll it into a cell. And so they're usually tucking those into, well, in suburbia, I've seen them in old glove fingers that are lying in like a, there's fine stuff, you know, but what they have the most action in and the safest action are the larger sort of holes in the timber. They tend to like that quite a lot. And I think it's like, I mean, you don't want to put on a glove and basically squash a whole family of unhatched yeah, so so that's one of the native ones. We actually, in again, governmental wisdom afoot, go to the next one. So that's actually called an African carder bee, and it's actually an African bee they brought in to pollinate lucerne crops because we didn't have anything to do with that already. And so we do have a lot of those around, sadly, but they still pollinate, they still do their thing, so we can't complain too much. And so you can see the hairs on the bottom of the abdomen there. That's actually what they're gathering the pollen onto, instead of like the scoper on the legs that a lot of other bees do. And so they sort of get into the flower and just go, sort of a bit of this, just so you get the right picture, you know. Keep an eye out for this stuff. And yeah, so in that sense, like I see them on calendula flowers a lot, sort of a lot of the more open flowers, because it's a little harder for them to back into like a tubular flower and get into it that way. Yeah, so again, yeah, it can be hard to tell the difference. These are a little smaller than the native leafcutter bees, but I guess, you know, I accept them. Go to the next one. So this was a really interesting find. So this is actually cross-section of one of the leafcutter bee. I think it's a native one. And so actually so one of the other things that they do, they actually go down, and this is pretty brave to be honest, they go down old spider holes, and they use the old spider holes to do their cells with the leaf curls. And so you can see how many layers they've like, that's a pretty good effort. There's a lot of like leaf layer that they've like whipped together there with a bit of salival glue, I imagine, and they create bee bread. And that's what a lot of the more like solitary bees do, because they don't have the people power to, you know, gather tons and tons of stuff like and combine it into something as rich as honey. And so they're actually mixing nectar and pollen together in this bee bread. And so they put a chunk of that down there, lay the egg, seal off the cell, go the next cell along. And so the interesting thing with this guy is these aren't supposed to be here. And this has actually been parasitized. So there's a wasp basically for every organism almost out there. And they often have like a long ovipositor. And so they basically look around and they find what their specific thing is. And then they'll find, like, wait till mama's out and go and basically drop their little ovipositor in, lay an egg in with the bee bread and the bee egg, and then off they go to find the next one. And then mummy goes, oh, nothing's wrong, seals it up. And unfortunately, no baby bees are going to come out of that cell. It's going to be several baby wasps. And so a lot of these are actually little wasp chrysalis that have consumed, and sort of you can sort of see where some of the eggs are there. So they've hatched, they've consumed some of the bee bread and probably the bee, you know, whatever stage of development it was at the time. And then they've turned into their chrysalis, where they go from like grub to adult wasp, and off they go. Don't be afraid of wasps. They are a big pollinator as well. But I'll talk about the range of pollinators after my crazy native bee rants. So yeah, that was quite a delicate little, very fine nail scissors. This is a very small, this is only like a ½ centimeter across, sort of a thing at most. So off you go. And so that is one of my, it's actually a while back now. It's probably a bit fuller than that. Definitely fuller of bees. So this just gives you an idea of all the different substrates you can be sort of playing around with. So like this is like primary insect hotel. So you've got like cob blocks as clay from my actual ground at home, which I found wasn't that good. When it cracks like that, you know, there's a lot of potential for invading species to get in there. So, you know, they don't quite like it as much. But the cob is actually like 4 parts sand, 1 part clay, like powdered clay, fire clay, I think they call it, or builder's clay. They sometimes mix it up in like cement and things like that for different color. But it's very easy to make. And you just basically, you're looking at like cutting 20 centimeter sections of like rectangular downpipe, or I use like, you know, milk bottles for those. The problem being like, it's not very structurally sound. So you have to like really wedge them in to a tray, because what you're doing, you're mixing up this stuff with a bit of water. So 4 parts sand, 1 part clay, or making a mud with your resisting clay, depending on how good a quality it is at home. And you're basically getting it to a fairly pliable, somewhat runny situation. And then you're basically pouring it into these things. You don't want it too wet because it takes too long to dry usually. So there's this happy mark in the middle there. And then if it's not too wet, if it is too wet, you just wait a little while for it to dry a bit. And then you can put these pilot holes in. And this is basically like doing using a pencil pointy end first. Do maybe 1 or 2 of those. I usually use 2 for the size of like those blocks. And that just sort of tricks things like the blue banded bees, which are a bigger ground nesting bee, into thinking that they've already been there. And so they cluster together because, well, I mean, if you see one blue banded bee family using a thing, then you go, well, I've tested already. I mean, tried and tested, let's go. I'll move in next door. And so having like a broader chunk of those can be more attractive to them, because if you think about it, you're trying to mimic nature, right? So like a big exposed clay bank in the bush. Sometimes they'll go under a log where like there's that little dry section that doesn't have any mulch over it, and they can sort of burrow down into that. I've used different things like these are those clay pipes that you see on the side of the road when people have replaced their old sewer pipes or whatever. Is that sewer pipes? I don't know. They didn't smell sewery, but you never know. And a whole range of different timbers. I've found that the hardwood, untreated hardwood, of course, is often the best. And going across the grain with your holes, growing down the grain, different bees like different things, not just bees. And bamboo offcuts is another one. So they, you know, depending on the bamboo, you can have the ones that are like, they have a pithy center. And so I find like, I don't know what bamboo they harvest for the bamboo stakes at the usual places that you buy, but they have a pithy center. And so there's certain bees, like I found a species of the mast bee are actually really keen on that. And they repurpose that pith, mix it up, and they use it to make membranes. So again, think wide, you know, there's like so many options out there for stuff, and they look cool if you fill them in, right? So it's like, it can be a bit of a feature. And this is actually pretty close to my side door, like where I go into a courtyard, and it's facing east. So it's like getting morning sun. It's not getting cooked from the afternoon sun from the west. Fairly well protected. Got a rooflet so it doesn't get totally smashed by water, because obviously, you know, it's if they've got cells in some of these cob blocks particularly, or mold. If you get mold starting to grow in your bundles and things, that's not going to be helpful. Mold is an enemy of most insects. Fungus can be very clever about dominating insects if it's the right fungus, things like that. So
anybody wants any? I've got lots of little bamboo sticks now.
Yep. From your own bamboo.
Yep.
Yeah. And are they like the hollows or the pith?
Hollow.
Yeah. So most of the bamboo I've grown have been the hollows. So I'm not sure what the species is that they use they harvest for the stakes. It's weird, but anyway, I'm still trying to track that down. Oh, there's so many things. Yeah, so I even trialed camphor laurel, which, like, you know, oh, maybe it'll help like stave off some of their parasites, you know. They didn't like it much at all. I didn't like it at all. And I don't like them. So I was like, there's got to be something I can do with this. No, just compost it. Yeah, and paper straws are another weird one. So wax paper straws.
Wow.
So again, those masked bees, the pith that they're getting out of some of those like pithy sort of stem bamboos and things, it must be quite cellulose, but easy to chew up cellulose. And so they actually chew up a lot of the entry of these wax paper straws, and they repurpose that as their membranes that they then wall off their cells down the straws. Helps to have the back blocked off, because if it's like open both ends, that they don't feel secure. So that's another option. And of course, things like, you know, having something trailing down, you'll see a photo in a bit why I like that. In fact, we'll just go through a few more things here for a second. We'll get to that bit. There's me playing around with all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so this is like one that I did for a client. And you can do them pretty small, but like a little house, basically, make them look very fancy. And so, yeah, core of cob blocks. You've got like most of a range in there, different hole sizes. You got your 4 mil up to like your 6, 8, probably like 6 to 8 mils where you get a lot of major action from resin bees and things like that. Resin bees are a larger bee that like steals resin from often the stingless bees, and they use that to seal off their own little holes. So that's a bit cheeky. Go to the next one. This is where, I mean, this is an IBC repurposed for fish breeding, like native fish breeding. But one of the things you can do, going back to like your container ponds, if you don't have like the room or the scope for like an in-ground thing, is having like that wet sand, because bees try to drink from any insect trying to land on, like get to the water. They got to contend with surface tension. And as a small, we don't have a problem with surface tension being big clawed mammals like we are. However, when you're small, it grabs you and it holds you and it will drown you very quickly. So having like something that wicks that moisture up to something they can land on, and that's where like your coarse river sand is really good in a pot, and sit that in there so it's like exposed at the surface. So that water is actually making moist sand available at the top at all times, and then they land on that and just drink straight out of that with no risk whatsoever. So that's a nice little trick.
Just damp sand.
Damp sand, yeah, because they just put their little tongue in there and get it all out. Otherwise, you can get like something like azolla, and they'll land on the azolla, and it's sort of a dry floating surface plant, and they'll just like drink through the gaps in the azolla, or duckweed if you get a thick enough mat of duckweed. So yeah, there's a few options to muck with that. And the beauty of those floating plants is you can actually scrape, when they do make a full coverage and you need to like bare some of that surface again, scrape it back, make it as mulch, compost. It's very, very beneficial. So this was just an old post. I was like a bedpost I was mucking around with. And just, arranging holes in different bee configurations. I had too much time on my hands in this particular month and year, but...
Was this during COVID?
No, this is before COVID, actually. But, I don't have the time for that now. So there's probably, yeah. And so I think there should be a picture of the resin bee coming up. Yeah. So this is a big black resin bee, and just a sizable bee. It's worth noting one of the things that these guys like the most, as far as an attractive flower, there's native centers. There's like that, big kind of a quite open yellow flower. It's a nitrogen fixer. And so like things like forest center is like a really good nitrogen fixing sort of shrub or like small tree. So you can use that as like a chop and drop thing, but it flowers really well and attracts some very interesting and useful pollinating natives. And so, yeah, some of the larger bee species, they do more of the similar pollination levels and types that the European bees would have been doing or are doing until very soon. And so you can see these guys have been nicking some of that resin, and they've actually closed off. Yeah, and you can sort of see that it's the same stuff. You go down to the stingless bee boxes and you're like, sneaky. And of course the tiny little guys can't do much about. These guys are like 2 centimeters long, they're pretty sizable. So yeah, go again. What do we got next? So many things. Yeah, that's a better look at one actually. And there's actually, I noticed 2 species, and that's like suburban lambton. So like the closest vegetation is blackbutt, which is very limited, and Jasmine Reserve. Don't know how far these guys are flying, but they could probably cover a couple of Ks if they were really looking, traveling far. But yeah, again, fantastic to find these things in suburbia. Go for the next one. Oh God, yeah. And so different species of resin bee, however, resin wasn't available enough, or like maybe it wasn't pliable enough, because it's the fresh stuff that they kind of need. It's really hard. It goes really, really hard from the stingless bees, like when it's been put down and, dried off a bit. It's like, it's harder than a brick, honestly. It's very, very hard. Amazing for, the indigenous populations used it to actually like glue on the spearheads to their spears and things like that, because it's just like sets so robustly. And you can sort of see just behind here, this one's actually using a little bit of chewed up organic matter instead. And so they're crazy adaptable. It's quite amazing how they can sort of roll with the punches, so to speak. But the thing is, you just have to provide that big range of different vegetation types. Not all of it's about the flowers. It's about like the leaves as well. Like if you're looking at getting butterflies to help pollinate some things, which they will, they need, so you don't just build a house for a butterfly. Their caterpillar has to be living on the thing they're eating, right? And so then it's just about like, all right, well, if I'm going to have butterflies, I need to have certain specific plants which lead to those butterflies and their whole like cycle of life. Yeah. So go for the next one. So blue-banded bees. Now, yeah. So blue-banded bees are one of the most important ones we're going to be looking at because they specifically do buzz pollination. And that's the specific pollination that European bees do. And so things like tomatoes, chilies, eggplants, whole family. And I recommend looking this up on like YouTube or something, like a close-up view of buzz pollination, because it's like, you look at like a tomato flower, for example, and they've got these yellow stem parts in the center, and they're actually tubes, and the pollen is sitting at the bottom of that tube. And it has to be vibrated at a certain frequency for that pollen to vibrate out the top so they can get it. And of course, that's how pollination works, right? Pollen has to go from one flower to another flower via an insect, or hopefully not us if we kill out all of our insects and other pollinating animals, because that's a lot of work. That's a whole lot of work, especially if you like your tomatoes. It's a big one. And so I'll talk about like, it's going to be interesting because some of there are these native bees that do buzz pollination, but they are limited for how active they are across the year. So they're active because they're ground nesters. It takes a while for that ambient temperature to creep into the soil and trigger their basically hatching. And so you're looking at like quite late spring before you start seeing these guys out. And European bees did not have that issue. They were just going all winter long. So growing some of those more like, you know, cherry tomatoes in winter might start seeing some issues. Well, I mean, it's mostly the Solanaceae family that are directly reliant on buzz pollination. But it will be super interesting and quite scary to see how things are changed in the veggie garden over the next year and ongoing. But yeah, so these guys, they're living in those cob blocks. And so I started with like a few of them hanging around at my place. I started putting cob blocks down and they started breeding up in those. And I now have a very sizable population of blue-banded bees. The only issue being what I just said, that like, you know, they're not active in winter. They're basically dormant. So yeah, and they really like blue flowers. They really like Lamiaceae family, which is like mint family. And so having things like in your native section, things like Prostanthera, really handy. Plectranthus, you know, that native, like I've actually seen it at in the bush tucker section. I don't want to say the full name, right? I'm not here to support them. But they call it bush basil. I'm not sure you can eat it, but I'm sure, I mean, they have to eat it, right? If they're selling it as that. But yeah, anyway, it's like it self-seeds. It's very easy to have in your understory of that sort of native garden. And they love the flowers of that.
They're beautiful flowers.
They are. They are. Yeah.
Just beautiful flowers.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one that I've found quite good, Queen of Herbs, which is not native. But like you can have it cascading over like a retaining wall, things like that. You can use it as like, it's quite aromatic, so it's really good for other purposes like, you know, pest distraction and things. But the blue-banded bees go berserk on it. Just like, it's one of the things that they really went quite mental on it early on. Also, when you're starting an insect hotel and you want these guys to move in, it can be useful to use, and this is weird because it's not a native, but Abelia, if you know Abelia, A-B-E-L-I-A. And so I don't mean to be offensive here, but I call it one of the grandma plants because it's usually in a grandma garden. It's fairly frequent. And so, yeah, they flower a long time and they've got quite a bit shallow, sort of a bell type flower. It's perfect. And so you can have a dwarf one of those in a pot, sit it near like the front of where your cob blocks are facing. And that can sort of be a nice way to sort of hurry up that moving in process. Yeah. Because look, nature operates on its own time scale and, you know, we're having a nap. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm not engaging. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, me too. And I'm going to cop it later. Don't worry. Just flop. Let's go to the next one. So yeah, blue banded's really good and quite easy to get breeding. I haven't managed to get their cousin, the teddy bear bee, breeding yet. However, what an amazing bee. Definitely still does buzz pollination, but this I found extremely keen, and this was in a pot, but it's in the aspen family. If you know, white aspen is the local one. Lemon aspen is like native to a bit further north than here. So I believe this is a lemon aspen in a pot, but they all have nice like fruit for bush tucker. But the flowers are particularly handy for apparently these guys because they just it's where I found them every time. You know, kept coming back to this one. They go around all over the place, but always here for the photo shoot. So it's super good. And I think, you know, there's probably something going on. Well, this is where, you know, if you can fit a good diversity of native and local native plants, ideally, if possible, the better. And some of those things are more like in the rainforest categories. So obviously you have to just be a little selective about where those things are planted. Maybe you don't want to have your rainforest species on the verge itself because that's, you know, you've got all the thermal mass of the road, you've got driveways, all the other exposure there. Yeah, so let's go to the next one. And so those guys are ground nesters as well. I just haven't managed to see, actually, I know where they were nesting south of here down Belmont Way, and it was under a house, again in clay. But I don't know what their threshold is, like why they wouldn't have moved in. Maybe the blue banded bees are a little territorial against their cousins. I'm not sure. Like, we'll not have your orange fur around here. Thank you. It's only blue bands. Blue bands forever. So this is a close-up of active hole of cob block. And when so even if you're not watching, sitting there, like having a coffee, just like staring, you can sort of see where they're starting to do their thing, because you've got pilot holes and that's where they start, but they actually burrow out and make tributary tunnels from the pilot holes. And then they back out like a little bulldozer with their bum and back legs, and they push the spoil out the front. And so you see there's little, so that it's hard to see there because it's a little out of focus. And my photography's gotten better than 2016. I should refresh this. Too much to do. And so you can see there's a pile there, and you can see this. So they've actually been like pushing it all out. Yeah. So that's a really interesting little signal to watch for. And this is interesting. So I was like, you know, I've got plenty. I had a crazy summer. I made that initial insect hotel, and then I'm like, a couple of years later, these blue-banded bees need more, more. So I've gone and I've made like extra towers undercover, sort of around in this like undercover space against the house. And there's actually like stingless bees not far away, but they don't compete or anything, different size, different needs. And this was a test because there are small like homolictus and things like tiny bees that live en masse in the ground as well. But they're just not as common in suburbia because everyone sprays the outside of their house with spiders, and that kills literally everything else, I guess. Makes things a little hard. Sorry? Like it is a pet hate, honestly. And rightly so. Wow. It just seems like such a terrible move, especially with the bee stuff going on now. Don't use pyrethrum-based anything in the garden if possible. It might come from a pyrethrum daisy, toted as natural organic, but as soon as it changes into an aerosol or like a powder form, certain death to bees. And a tiny bit of it, boom, dead. Sorry?
Everybody on Zoom, can you please go on mute?
Anyone on Zoom, if you didn't hear Katie, mute is my best friend right now, and yours. Can you hear me? All right. So I was sort of did some little tiny ones, and these are just like holy bricks, but it's just like experimentation. And I started with just like, there was a skewer, just like a wooden skewer, sort of pilot holes. Didn't see any action of that for like a good couple of years. And then I started seeing unholed ones that I'd filled and left, and they were starting to be burrowed out by tiny holes, much smaller than a blue-banded bee. I haven't managed to verify exactly what's doing that, but there is something. There is something happening. So, and again, like I have been pretty on the ball about like documenting all the native bees I've been attracting over the last 10 years at this place. Found another one only last week. So things do be changing. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next one. So, this is a great reason why you have like something that hangs down over the front of your insect hotel, especially with the cob blocks, because these are all the boy blue-banded bees. It's a little washed out. They're, depending on how long they've been alive, they might lose a little bit of blue. There's actually a few species as well, so you might cop different species with different levels of iridescence. But at night time, the ladies go into their holes and sort of block the hole off with their bod. They're like a living wall or something, which is handy in advent of any kind of parasitic. There are actually some parasitic bees that predate specifically on blue-banded bees, but hey, diversity begets diversity, right? And so these are all the boys that aren't allowed in the house, and they have to congregate out the front. And so, again, safety in numbers. And so they sleep by they latch on with their mandibles, and then they just like, and so you see them all just jumbled together on these like stems of a plant. This is actually a plectranthus that I was talking about, which is the dead stem. So yeah, it was a pretty cool time to see that actually happening finally. It's like, you know, so each one of those has got like its own family unit. So you're starting to get a decent number of blue-banded bees in like a suburban yard at this point. Yeah. So if you think like, okay, each one of those is a boy and each one of those has a lady, and they've been both spending the whole summer like putting new cells down, next season's going to be a boomer. Yeah. So anyway, so that gives you a bit of an idea of like the range, a very small amount of the range of native bees. And again, like, you know, instead of like aiming for something really specifically, it's good to just like hedge your bets and make sure that you've got all of those different situations down pat. So your housing, you've got, you know, as in like your substrates for breeding in. I don't mean tiny little houses necessarily. You can make them look like that if you really have the time and the inclination. The water supply, make sure it's accessible and always around. And flowers, so that's the food. I mean, it's like us, right? You got the main three things. You need shelter, you need food, you need water. Hey, clothing, they don't need it so much. They got fur. Yeah, so good. And we're going to diversify from the bees for a second, and probably for the rest of this because I've been ranting. This is a really common thing I come up against. People are like, wasps, oh, kill them all, please. Oh, hell, I hate them, they hate me. Let's just... So the thing about, you know, your paper wasps, like bees, the colony bees, stingless bees have lost their stings. They've got the remnants, but they're no longer very effectual on the hive defense. Whereas, you know, anything else that has a lot of its eggs in one basket, their aggression is going to go up accordingly because they have to defend all that stored energy, right? And so that's why paper wasps are a little more twitchy than other wasps, but most wasps are very not keen to just get up in your grill. So, you know, your mud dauber wasps. So the thing about wasps, they're doing pest control for you because of the living larder thing. So basically they're looking at paralyzing a grub or a spider or a caterpillar or whatever, and they all have a specific food type they're looking for. Food type, but it's food for their babies. What their food is, what fuels their action getting around and collecting all the insects is flowers and nectar. And in that process, they're doing some of that pollination. Yeah. So the thing about these guys is, okay, if they're setting up a nest under your doorway, door arch or something, that's not a great space. You know, okay, move them along, that's fine. But most of the time, people get stung by these because they have no other greenery or habitat around, and they've got a hedge. And so these guys are set up in the hedge where you can't see them, and then they go to prune their hedge with something nice and loud, like a electric hedger. And of course, they're going to get pretty pissy because they've got all their eggs in one basket. And you can sort of see this is one lady that's gone and set up they're trying to make a new colony. And so they've got a few unfertilized eggs in that. This is actually underneath the leaf of a Atherton raspberry I found. It defends the raspberries against the children that live in the front of my house. No, I'm not kidding. It's actually moved on since. Look, they do tend to associate with the Atherton raspberry in my book because like it's spiky and I guess there's less predators. But a story I'll relate to you about these. So I have a seedling table. And so that's where I have, a bunch of trays with like stuff that I'm germinating, etc. And I noticed they started setting up right underneath one of the trays, right adjacent to my, I'm like, all right, that makes me slightly anxious, but I'm going to tolerate it for a hot second. And I was really interested to see how they were developing their nest. And I was sort of getting my face to here and I was sort of breathing on them. And they were like, you can sort of see when they're getting a bit twitchy. And what are you doing? You're going to coming at me? You coming at me, punk? Hey. And I was saying, no, I'm just hanging and observing, friends. And they got used to me and they kept building until they got to a very nice size and they wouldn't attack me. They didn't see me as a threat because I was there every second day or something and just sort of going, sup. Then, much to my sadness, a butcher bird found them and digested all of the adults and then started eating chunks out of the entire nest. So, wow, I didn't know that had happened, but observation made. And so that's why these guys are hanging out in something like raspberries because it defends their, all their eggs, their one basket eggs. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course. Yeah, please interact as much as you. I should have said at the start, like that's how I like to roll. Yeah. No, don't. Yeah.
We've got a wasp, or our washing line.
Okay.
About that size.
Uh-huh. Is it got active individuals?
Yes.
It's not ideal.
When you say move them along, what do you mean?
Okay, so there's a couple of ways to go about this depending on how keen you are. Do you have a bee suit?
No.
Okay. Can you borrow a bee suit? Okay. Do you have a bee suit you can lend? Are you around the corner? Oh, yeah, it's easy. There you go. Okay, so these guys do a massive amount of like pest control in the grub front. So they like your soft-bodied grubs. And so, you know, your cabbage patch butterfly grubs, the green ones, they're grabbing those. Yeah, and they're storing them in their paper cells with the egg. This one is probably waiting on help, to be honest. It seems like a lonely little situation. However, so one way you can do this is you can protect yourself, pull it off by the stem, usually where it's joined, and then you can basically like, you can use something temporary, like a bit of tape, or like you can chuck a needle with a bit of string through it. This is what I mean, it's sort of high input at this point. If you just knock it off, they will rehome themselves, but it's like they take a big hit because they've done a lot of work to sort of get all this together. You know, they have to chew up vegetation and then mix it with saliva and then regurgitate it into a nice nest. You know, sounds pretty hectic, right? All the while defending. So yeah, you can basically go like that, chuck it up underneath a safe space. So you can either go, if you've got a nice tree with like a branch that overhangs. See, how open are they? They've just put it out in the middle of nowhere on the.
It's on a washing line.
Yeah, so there's no cover.
On the strut. It's not one of the rotational ones. It's not a hill.
It's not a hill source. Yeah.
The horizontal type of affair that comes
Fold-up sort of thing.
And so you pull it out and hook it on. Oh, okay, yeah, but that was sort of the type. Sure. But there's no cover over it or anything like that? There's no like weather defense?
Under the eaves a little bit.
Okay, so has it placed itself under the eave in that respect? It hasn't. Okay, well, they're doing it. They're a bit silly. They could have done a better job of that. Anyway, so they'd probably be quite happy for you to move it into a better location, to be honest. And so you can tie that basically around like a more protected space, you know, usually a little higher up underneath like a bough of a tree, or if you have like a bit of, a bit of your eave that you don't go near quite as often, you could sort of tack it up underneath some of that. There's different species. There's probably like 4 different species of paper wasp in the area. Some of them smaller, some of them bigger. This is probably the standard around here, sort of medium-sized wasp. But yeah, I mean, I said this to people at one of my talks at Living Smart Festival a couple of weekends ago, and they're sort of like, "You're a mad hatter, aren't you?" I'm like, yes. But I love wasps. So yeah, I usually, they come and they go as well. So I guess if you don't want to go to that level of effort, they will come again, and they'll keep doing their work. Just don't spray them or burn them, which is generally what people do, because they're not going to be alive to reset up anywhere that way. Yeah. And if they're smart, like if you do just pull it off and you sit it down near where they were, they might treat that as like, oh, weather's knocked us off or something like that. And then they might sort of, I'm not sure to what degree they sort of rescue the cells and things like that, but they it's easier for them to sort of repurpose some of their pre-masticated material than go fresh. Yeah.
Similar to bees, if you're going to move the beehive, you only move it so far. Yeah. Same with this, you move it.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. Like if you move them like 20 meters in one go, it's going to be a little hard for them to geolocate. So again, like ideally you want to find the nicest spot within a couple of meters. I think you don't have to be quite as, like with the stingless bees, you don't want to move them more than like, you have to either move them over a K in one go or really like inch them. Once a week you might move them like a box width at most, within a meter, because they're very geolocated. So, you'd have to be flying 500 meters as a tiny insect and then making sure you come back to the exact same spot. Yeah, pretty hectic. Go to the next one. So yeah, wasps, all kinds, really beneficial in the pest control, but they're all gathering nectar from flowers, and that means pollination. And there is a wide variety of wasps out there. So again, all the different flowers, all the different flower colors, try and diversify in every class of flower if possible. Backbone of natives. Flies do way more pollinating than we would have thought, honestly. And this one's showing off. It's got shades on. It's like, check it. I'm owning this. And so I think this is a, oh, my brain is starting to fry. The kind of fly is actually one of the hoverfly group, and there's a huge range of them. Often what people like mistake for bees are hoverflies, and you'll notice that the flight pattern will be quite different. And it's basically it's a mimicry thing, because bees with their banding, they got a sting. Flies don't have stings, and so it's nice to like put on a bee jacket and get around like that, because you're going to get less trouble from the birds and whatnot. But basically, like, this is one of the ones that it helps to have like a bog garden as well. I mean, I know this is weird, and like creating all these different like environmental niches in a small space, but I have like, so there's a lot more of these around at the moment because it's been really wet. And so when you have fully inundated soil, you get things like crane flies, which look like a big mosquito. So they do some pollinating. You get all these sort of rat's tail maggot style flies, which are like in very stagnant water. And so if you see like very vegetation rich, sometimes I find them in my liquid compost. If you know what that is, it's like I put all this weeds in like a tub with water, fill it up, spike it with a bit of manure or something, put the lid on. And so it's like it's an anaerobic breakdown unless you put bubbles through it. And you can make like liquid fertilizer with it. Just don't water it over the top of your plants, water around the roots, because the bacteria and that stuff is not meant to come in contact with the above parts of the plant. You're going to cause yourself some issues. But yeah, so there's a whole range, and it's like incredibly diverse. Diptera, which is the fly family, like massive as well. And so, yeah, rat's tail maggots, they float in really wet, that sort of rich organic, so it's basically soup. And so the tail of the maggot is what's giving them their little air snorkel. And so they're not like, because they can't get a lot of oxygen out of the water, and they don't have gills or anything. So they're just like floating around in that. And so there's like actually a weird amount of, like robber flies, they don't do a lot of pollinating because they're like a primary predator. But again, like natural pest control, you'll get some robber flies, you'll get some other ones that are going to do some of the pollinating stuff too. The beneficial insect attracting flower mix can be a really good way to go if you're not sure to start with about what you want to, like perennials are great, but you want to fill gaps. So with your perennials, go, all right, that's usually flowering at this time. I want to get some flowering in winter, autumn. Make sure you're staggering your flowering times, because there's no point in having like all your flowers in spring. My garden's like an overstimulating place right now, because everywhere I look is flowers. It flowers all the other times of years, but now it's just like, oh my God, it's insane. And the bees must be real happy. So yeah, make sure, stagger those times. And the annuals that you usually get in those beneficial insect attracting mixes, you've got cosmos, you've got sweet alyssum, tiny flowers, but they're really good for the hoverflies. And of course the hoverflies have like a larval stage, which is doing pest control for you as well. So they're eating aphids usually. That's a different talk. Again, there's too much to cover. Why am I having a mental blank on this flower? Ugh, it's so obvious. No, that's a weed. Yeah, marigold. That's a marigold type flower. There's a perennial marigold, which is your passion fruit marigold. But having those annual ones that you can sort of, they don't take long to go to flower, and then they sort of seed and die. And then you can have those things like turning over a little faster. And they will grow winter and summer all year round. They'll just have a shorter life, so you just have to reseed. And that's usually like, I just let things flower, go to seed, and then everything self-seeds. And then I just thin out the stuff that I don't want. And I have full coverage, and there's flowers all the time. Anyway, go to the next one. Phew, that's a pretty fly. Yeah, your butterflies. Like I was saying before, this one's actually like going to a pollinators, which is like a native pea flower sort of shrub. There's a wide variety of those as well. They seem to really like the yellow in this particular type. But again, there's a big diversity of butterflies as well. And one of the edible butterfly attracting plants that I found recently is Okinawa spinach. Have you seen that around? Yeah, got the purple underside of the leaf, really, really good, like perennial. But the flowers of that, I think I've got the next one actually. Let's go there. It has a crazy amount of these, and there's actually 2 to 3 different species that come to it. And it's just got like this little tussle flower, and the caterpillar actually lives on the leaves of it as well. So it's like all of the things happening at once. But yeah, having like those, the range of like, have some acacias, even though they're shorter lived, you know, wattles, that is. Make sure you've got, you know, when you're doing like your native garden section, make sure you like, some out of like each of the main sort of plant groups. You want your nitrogen fixers that have like the pea flowers. Your wattles are in that nitrogen fixing group, but their flowers are different. They're more like the puffballs. But your, you know, your Prostanthera, your Wildernow, which is your Plectranthus, Zaeria is a really good one. Also repels ticks. Anyway. Grevilleas, yes. Grevilleas are really good for the birds, but one of the downfalls with your Grevillea, with most people doing their Grevillea plantings, is they always go for the large flowered cultivars. And so what that does is encourage one subset of birds, which is usually noisy miners. And noisy miners are a gang bird. They like to, you know, hang out in groups and they boss every other bird out of the space. And when you've got all of these big flowered, so if you think about what naturally grows in the area, we don't have large flowered grevilleas. A lot of those are cultivars from WA and places like that. We have smaller flowered grevilleas, which are much more appropriate for attracting smaller birds and some of those other bird pollinators. But good luck with your smaller birds around suburbia because cats. So that's where some of your spiky natives can come in handy. Cockspur thorn, oh boy. That's got some thorns on it. Not ideal for next to a thoroughfare, but in the back corner somewhere where you don't have to go to very frequently. Can be a great space for paper wasps as well as small bird habitat because no cat wants to climb up in there for a bird meal, usually. They do get pretty hungry though. I don't know, is it hunger? Is it just like a thirst for blood? I'm not sure. That was the last one, yeah. So, you know, experimenting with some of these different like perennial veg plants as well. It's crazy what different, like these are native butterfly, but they breed up on these quite happily. So there are some like usually a lot of butterflies have a very specific plant of preference. And so I'm guessing that there's something related to this out there that these guys like, or they just manage to adapt. And I mean, if nature doesn't adapt a little bit with what we do to it, where are we going to be left? I guess. So there's a lot of that. But yeah, Okinawa spinach, I recommend in the garden for this specifically, but also great food. Really good for you. Purple pigment makes people live longer, apparently. Do we want to live longer? I don't know. Think about it. Yeah, so beetles, and I was trolling. I have some old beetle photos, but I haven't had any recently. But there are things like jewel beetles. They're like really small, long. They're really like iridescent green usually. See them in flowers. On the hibiscus plants. Yeah. So not super good pollinators. They're like sap drinkers. Yeah. They're damn pretty though, which is also fine. Diversity is good. There might be like a parasitoid wasp that likes to lay eggs in them and they're going to be going and visiting flowers in between. So, hey, there are, oh wait, my brain skipped a beat. Beetles. So there's like Scarabaceae is a big lot of the beetle family. So they're like your fiddler beetle, you know, that like black one with like that bright lime green sort of fiddle pattern on it. The leopard beetles, which I see in flowers a lot, which is sort of another Scarabaceae. So they all have a larval stage, which is the curl grubs, right, under the ground. And so if you don't have these perennial things like natives that these are usually feeding up on under the surface that you don't see, you're not going to have these guys pop out and do some of these pollination services. So again, like people, they think curl grubs, lawn attacking, danger. Yeah. And that's just because like they're related, those beetles, but they're not a native beetle. And there's a ton of other beetles there that are all feeding on roots as well. They're not feeding on roots to the point where they're leaving no roots for the plant. These are all very like they're in balance. So I think when you start having a problem with those, it's usually because something is out of balance, like a lawn monoculture. And it's like, oh, I wonder why all the roots of my lawn are getting eaten. Oh, because you've got nothing else there. Yeah, that's right. They like that. And it's again, like anything, like a cabbage patch butterfly flying over a hill and finding a whole field of cabbage. What are they going to do? They're going to breed, and you're going to have a lot of problems. So balance is key. Often the next thing that people have issues with the curl grub is going to be like in a pot where you haven't changed the potting mix over for a while and it's getting really tired and the plant is stressed. Stressed plant means lower natural defenses, like we get when we're stressed. We're really stressed, we get sick easy. Same happens for every other animal and plant in the world. So, you know, if they can't, they're not feeling their best, they're not going to have all of those defense mechanisms saying, you know, putting that energy into bitter tasting compounds in their roots, which are like, all right, you can eat this much, but after that, you've got a tummy ache, all right? Yeah, all that stuff. So all of this made sense so far? Yeah? I feel like I'm preaching to the converted, which usually happens at these sorts of things, but hey, what can you do? All right, do you want to like do questions and chat? How long's it been? I've been rambling for a while, right?
Yeah.
What's the time? Wow, all right, yeah. Yeah, I said I was doing an hour, all right? Okay, well, let's, yeah. We got questions or we just cover literally everything?
Can you tell me the name of this butterfly here?
Okay, so there's a common crow, but this is the blue crow, I think.
Okay, blue crow.
Yeah, so I had like, when I got home from my 8-hour day today, I was like, I want to spice this up. I'm going to try and find some of these photos I haven't put on a thing yet. And I found the photo and then I was like, I'll get back to you. And then I lost it in the mass. And then I'm like, okay. But anyway, that's the caterpillar is living on the Okinawa spinach and feeding on that. And there's such a bush. There's so much of it that like, yeah, you know, easy shared.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're...
That spinach likes growing in wet, boggy areas. It likes plenty of water.
Yeah.
It's actually growing in the back of the water just about.
Yeah. If you want to clone it, you can just like chuck a stem of it in and it'll roots into some water. Not everything will like that very much. But that's the standard.
Also, I knew it as a shrub or a bush first, but I planted it near a water tank which had trellis on it. It started to climb and it's like 2 meters high.
The Okinawa?
Yeah. I noticed heaps of those butterfly too, but I didn't put two together.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, no, it's not a climber per se, but it will clamber through like a bit of a fence. I've got it doing the same. It's like a 2-meter piece of like chicken wire at the moment, just like gone right up there. Yeah. And that's not the only butterfly I saw at that. There were like 3 species, weirdly enough. Same with the Pollinators, like with that other native butterfly that I can't remember the name of now, but the yellow pea flower, there were 3 different species of that, all feeding at once on that. So yeah, so that's I actually was going to put, there were like 25 slides. I was just piling them on and like, oh my God, this is just going to go forever. I thought I was limited. I usually get dragged off in an hour. Like that's usually what happens. They get the stick out and they're like, no, that's it. People need to rest. Nobody can take longer than that of you. Please stop. So yeah, there was a blue iridescent, sort of like bluey gray, smaller one. I wish I put I got a shot with 3 different species all in the one shot. I should have showed it off, but I didn't. Anyway, that is what it is. Pig face, great hardy one for the verge, open flower. You get a whole range of different bees and other things going to that. Honestly, just like look at your local plant places, like Hunter Indigenous Plants is great. Try not to stick with like cultivars if you can avoid it, because most of the things, Trees in Newcastle at Belmont. Yeah. It's very confusing and frustrating for me because it used to be easy access Parry Street.
That's what I say too.
I was just like, that was where I was there every week, but now, hey. So they're actually, I wonder if they mind me doing this. That's business, right? So they're up at Beresfield.
Somebody told me there was a place up there.
Yeah, so usually you want to call ahead and go, you guys there? Mention my name and I'll get you through the door maybe. No, it's more like they usually don't have like an open. I've sent a lot of people there and I don't know if it's like something that they want or like, anyway, but they're local native varieties. They collect seed from the valley. And one of the things that we're running up against in suburbia is if you just buy your natives from and like the usual places, a lot of the genetic diversity is being pinched right down. And so genetic diversity is important when you're starting to get like, you don't want your pollinators just going to like one genetic line of a plant for their entire source of food, because it's like Macca's, right? Like nothing's going to be healthy with that. You want to give them diversity because diversity is healthy. And so, yeah, make sure you're not just going for those cultivars because they are quite, they're like bottlenecked as far as how far their genetic diversity is spread. And that also means like, not just for the pollinators, but like as soon as we get more crazy weather, their resilience is less. So they're going to get more like, they're going to suffer more, and then they're going to suffer more like when they're more stressed, and then they're going to die because a bunch of beetles have gone nuts on their roots because they don't have the defense mechanisms up, right? So, yeah.
The Hunter Wetland Centre as well.
Yes.
They have some plants out there.
Yeah.
They have a very interesting selection, though.
They have had their
Yeah.
but you can go
Every Thursday morning, I
Mm.
believe. Thursday morning.
And it's just local natives then, is it? Or
No, it's
no?
not just,
Okay.
but they're knowledgeable people, I'm sure you
Yeah. No, and look, I'm not saying like don't have any cultivars, don't diversify. It's all going to be good, but like having your core base local native, I think is underappreciated. Yeah, because you don't see the genetic diversity, right? And so you know, with all of our like local bushland getting like chopped up more and more edge effects, and then you know you got privet seeding in there more easily, and I don't know, all the other things, means like those specific local genetics that are suited to our immediate area they're not propagated and they're not sold, and they're, you know, I mean, I go in there and I get seeds when I want, but I'm cheeky like that. And probably if everyone was doing that, that would be a bad thing. So, but I don't have a lot of competition on that front. Yeah, so again, support your local natives. It's really handy. You know, spice it up with a little extra or whatever. Be my guess, but yeah.
How long does a bee live for?
Depends on the bee. Like some of the native solitary bees will like overwinter as an adult. Some of the species will die off and wait for their cells to hatch, and that'll just be the next generation. You have a bee in mind?
No.
It's like, which of these 2,000 species? So like, I think from what I've seen, things like your blue-banded bees, they probably die off and they wait for the next generation to come out for that to replenish their population. Whereas like if you're looking at something like a stingless bee, they probably only live for 2 months as an individual, but they have a quick, like they're all working together to basically like make sure that the propagation space is constantly active during the warm season. So they're replacing those workers. Those workers are working themselves to death real quick, but there's lines of them waiting behind, just ready to get going. So it's harder for the more solitary bee species to sort of have that quicker turnover, because there's only so much. You know, usually they want to, as an adult, live the entire warm active season, because otherwise, you know, what are you going to do? It's not going to get enough propagation. They're not going to get enough like fertilizing and egg lines out just to keep themselves a healthy populace. So yeah.
Like the you said the blue-banded bee lived in the
cob blocks. Mm.
Can you extend the season that they're effective by having multiple cob blocks in different microclimates?
Yeah, so that's something I've been playing with. So because they're usually nesting in the ground, right, in a natural sense, the thermal mass of the entire ground is actually pretty solid. Whereas if you have these things a little bit more, I mean, naturally they're going to be like this, but you can actually put, say with the the thermal mass in one of those better blocks that I've filled up, for example, if you have those have more sun exposure, particularly in the morning, then the ambient temperature in that material is going to be much higher, much earlier on, and that will lead to then them hatching out earlier. So yeah, I definitely think that's the trigger for them, the temperature. So it's worth. They do, yeah. It's heavy on the thermal mass front. So
if you're building bee hotels or something, probably not important.
Yeah, hedging your bets in any sense is a good idea, especially because, like, again, you'll get the differences in ambient temperature and other weather effects. Without doing these experiments, we won't ever find those things that are like, hey, that's active way earlier. What's the difference? More morning sun, less wind exposure, So crosswind is probably going to be something that robs heat from them. So there's like a few of these environmental factors that you can sort of moderate to, curb how that works. I think probably I will. So I'm going to, I'm meant to be doing a full 3-hour workshop around this stuff on Saturday coming, where we're going to just build like a ton of cob blocks out of like old square downpipe that's been just like rusted off on ends, and so I'm just going to cut that up and just like show people how to do all that properly, and probably run them through something similar to this as well. It's going to be a hectic 3 hours, I'm sure, but yeah, with some of that I'll have excess, and I'm going to because they'll be metal as well, they'll convey heat a lot faster. So I'll see how that works. If that's a problem, I think the problem would be that in the middle of summer when it's really hot, that's when you start getting them cook. So my general setups have been quite well protected. So it's going to be like playing that fine line between like early warmth and too much warmth when it heats up. Maybe it'll just be up to us going like, all right, well, I won't put the rooflet on, or I'll only have a limited amount of rooflet until a certain temperature in summer when I'll extend it a bit, and then they get their protection once they're already out and active. There might be a few ways to wangle that. Yeah, people have been trying to work this out for like having them operate in glass houses and stuff as well, where European bees have been a bit hard to keep in there. Imagine having like having a glass house full of just tomatoes with like a whole European. They're too hot. Yeah, and also you just like go in there, they'd be hot and bothered and just like sting the living crap out of you, to be honest. Yeah, they'd be quite irritable, I imagine, if not dead. So yeah, I don't like. I think it's a weird place to be living and having glass houses, to be honest. It's a bit too warm in my book. Further inland maybe, but if you're going to do that, have like if you want to extend your like warm season, like have seedlings happening earlier, have like cold frames, small. It's like a mini glass house where you don't have to climb inside it, and you can just like put it away if you don't need it anymore for the other time when it's warm enough. Yeah, is that making sense?
I think maybe I can close the presentation.
Yeah, do it.
I'm going to work out how to get back to Zoom and see if anybody on Zoom has.
Oh, Zoom questions. Woo. Yeah.
But if anybody wants to kind of do this,
I'm scared to say unmute yourself and ask a question, because if they all do it at once, it's going to be very hard to pick out what's going on. Oh, I can see some of these people here. Greg Colby, do you have a question? You do not? Okay. Did you shake your head?
Lachy, I have a question.
Oh, yes.
It's Sam.
I'm trying to see where you are. I can't see.
Just
Sam Golder. Yeah. What is your question, Sam?
It sort of am just starting to write articles for the newsletter for Permaculture Hunter. And my next one was on something that I saw the other day, because I've just recently got into making insect houses.
Oh, cool.
And
welcome to the community.
Yeah, I read something the other day about on a I think it was an etymology site about certain sort of prefab ones and kits that you buy, that the materials in them are dangerous and can cause mold.
Yeah.
And of course, mites, that sort of thing. So I was wondering if I could email you after this to get, you know, a sort of basic list of what you think are the best items to use.
Yeah, for sure. You're welcome to. Yeah, so yeah, so certain known garden materials / other warehouse places have been selling insect hotels that have been grossly under researched and built in Asia somewhere by poor starving hands, I'm sure. And they are not very good, let's put it that way. So a lot of the bamboo...
Okay, so I admit I got the $2.50 one that was on clearance from that warehouse and made it with my nieces.
Yeah.
And it got me hooked. But yes, I'm...
It was a gateway insect
the
hotel.
whole learning thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so most of the time...
it's the whole learning thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I'm not ribbing you. That's just how I am. Okay. So the depth of those holes isn't adequate for the most part. Often the girth of the bamboo in them is way too wide for most things. If you're over sort of a centimetre, you're way out of the ballpark. Also, you'll find that a lot of them have I think this is corner cutting, I'm sure it is, but there's like a panel on the front with the holes drilled in it. And it's just an open space behind it, which is completely pointless.
Yep.
Unless you just want cockroaches or spiders, which, you know, spiders, yeah, all right, they can live anywhere though. So I think probably, yeah, you got to make sure you're looking at like, for any of the depth of holes, you're looking at 10 to 15 centimeters ideally, 15 best. This is very confusing for me. I'm like, you're staring at the back of my, okay. Hello. So again, yeah, those holes are way too big. The girth of those bamboo bits are just useless. Anything with an airspace behind it, not useful at all. It's like a facade. It's just a pretend thing. And what else have I seen in them? It's mostly that. And the wood itself is actually like pine, almost to the lightweight quality of balsa wood, which is very quick to absorb water and then mold, and then you've got a completely useless unit. So yeah, stick with your hardwoods ideally. Untreated stuff is always preferable because treated stuff is obviously full of poison that no insect wants. And you're okay using some things like PVC. It does exude certain things over time, but it's usually in contact with soil. But I think, you know, in the context of like a dry cob block or something, using it is probably not going to be such a risk for the bees long term. And I've certainly used them to great effect. And it's good to find like these things being turfed on the side of the road and reuse them anyway. Yeah. Does that answer any of that? All that? So more?
The workshops for which there's still places available.
Oh, there are, yeah. I'm actually thinking about moving it to my house because of the low numbers, and it's going to make it a lot easier. But then if I get more numbers, I'm going to have to figure something else out. So yes, no, if you look at my Facebook, Tree Frog Permaculture, and events, there should be an event there called Pollinator Incubator. Otherwise, where else? Oh, Eventbrite. If you look up Pollinator Incubator on Eventbrite, I should have done Humanitics, but I couldn't remember the name of it. Next time. So yeah, there is a cost to those tickets, but I assure you, it's worthwhile. And I need food, baby, to keep what I'm doing. Yeah. So yeah. Please, if you're interested in all of the hands-on front and potentially me going through a few more details of bits and pieces like that and the finer nitty-gritty stuff, yeah, come along.
People will be going home with their own cob.
Yes, there will be. Yeah, basically you'll get a couple of cob blocks to take home. I'm going to, like, on Friday afternoon, prepare a bunch of materials because I have all that time available, apparently. Not really. Yeah, so yeah, you'll get some tasty treats to take home, and plenty more information and probably snacks. Yeah, so. Oh, and if it's at my house, you'll actually see some of the stuff that's happening. Oh, and also, I'm going to weigh up some of my stingless bee boxes. And if they are the target weight, I'm going to be doing a split that you can all see in front of you if you're interested in that. So, and if you're lucky, you'll get a little bit of like stingless bee honey to taste or take home. We'll see. It's up to them, I swear. It's not my decision. I'll have to do the weighing Friday evening. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to look at. Honestly, it's too much. Yeah. Any other questions? What do you got? Risa. We've got someone at Milrose Farm. Dan Ivy.
Lachlan, I've just shared your event for Saturday on the Permaculture Hunter page so that members can attend if they'd like to. So hope that helps you.
Thank you. Would you like to do my invoicing? As well, I'll pay you.
But happy to do social media stuff to help you out.
Okay, well, that's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, I can't do everything myself, it turns out. It's killing me. Who else? Anyone? Questions? General comments? Tell me to go home. I'd love to do that eventually. Sorry.
Well,
go on.
Yeah, no more than 5 more minutes. I was going to say, I noticed last season that the choco, basically, it was covered in wasps, and that's the main source of pollination for the choco.
Wow. Yeah. I've noticed that too, actually. Yeah, they are really keen on that. It's like a lime green, like really pale limey kind of weird flower. It's not very attractive to our eyes, but if you, this is another thing, look up buzz pollination close up on for videos on YouTube, because that's cool. There's another one which is like flowers under a UV light. And so all the colors that we see is one thing, but bees are seeing a lot of other information. So they've got like these, like a lot of flowers have arrows that are like pointing to the center of the flower, and like, this is a landing pad, this is where the food is, all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's crazy to think like we only take in so much with our beady eyes, but yeah, the insects are copying a lot more.
At our place, a bee, probably just the European bee, really.
Oh, them.
Very, very busy in poppy.
In a poppy,
and you could actually see. I mean, obviously, we're missing a great deal with our human eyes.
Yeah.
You could see all the patterning inside the poppy.
Yeah.
Very spectacular.
Yeah. No, I really like the macro photography end of things, because like some of the stuff that we just can't really see, like until you blow it up a bit and you just go, wow, that's sick. So good. Yeah, so very exciting stuff. Look, if there's a message to take home, spend time in your garden, not just working. I'm guilty of this. I just go, there's a job. And like, no, sit down, have a coffee, look at something. Just sit there and enjoy it. And the stuff you will see that you've never seen before, oh boy. And not just pollinators, but that's the focus of today's little fun jaunt. But yeah, there's so many cool things. So definitely take the time and just slow down. I need to slow down, man. Damn, I'm ready. Somebody send me home.
Well, I was going to say, I think we will send Lachy home.
Yay.
Thank you very much, Lachy. It's been absolutely awesome, as always.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the photography. As another insect nerd who I don't know anything about them. I just love photographing them and seeing to Lachy go, what's this?
Yeah, I sometimes get some very odd stuff too. Like, I don't know what that white thing coming out of that snail was last week, but yeah. Anyway, investigation pending. Yeah, all right.
Thank you very much. And yes, Lachy does have a course this weekend and does do lots of courses around Newcastle, Lake Quarry. Local resource, a horrible one that.
Just don't treat me as lumber, please. I need my legs.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy gardening.
I guess we will close the Zoom component.
Thanks for Zooming, everybody.
Good night. everybody, and yeah, really appreciate it.
I'll look for an email from you, Sam.
Good night, everyone.
Buried in the
Thank you.
mess. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Good night.
Good night. Oh boy. Oh, thanks for coming. Thanks for filling out the peripheries of this room.